The sterile scent of the hospital mixed with the sharp tang of antiseptic, but nothing could mask the overpowering smell of death in room 304. Minjun Kim stood frozen in the doorway, his breath caught in his chest. His eyes locked on the frail figure in the bed, and a cold chill ran down his spine. His mother, the woman who had given up everything for him, who had worked 3 jobs and never once complained, lay motionless on the hospital bed. Her skin had turned as thin and pale as paper. Her once vibrant eyes were now dull, barely open, and her shallow breaths came in painful gasps. But none of this was what shocked Minjun. No, it was the sight of the woman standing beside her, a stranger, a black nurse who appeared calm on the surface, but there was fear behind her eyes. In her hands, she held a small, old-looking clay bowl. The dark liquid inside shimmered under the harsh fluorescent lights, smelling of earth, rain, and something ancient. Minjun's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening in front of him. Behind him, 3 of his men stood at attention, their hands resting on their weapons hidden inside their jackets, ready to act if anything went wrong. But no one moved. No one said a word. The air between them and the nurse felt charged, thick with tension. "Sir," the nurse said, her voice a whisper that seemed too fragile for such a dire moment. "I know you don't know me. I know this all looks crazy, but if you just let me give this to your mother, I can save her life." Minjun's jaw clenched. His mother, the woman who had raised him alone, had been given days to live by the best doctors in Los Angeles. They had said there was nothing more to be done. She had been getting weaker by the hour, and now this stranger was offering him a bowl of what looked like muddy water, claiming it could save her. "Give me one good reason." Minjun's voice was cold, like the dead of winter. "Why I shouldn't have my men throw you out of this room right now." The nurse met his gaze without flinching, her eyes steady, though they betrayed her fear. "Because your mother just squeezed my hand. Because 30 seconds ago, when I told her what this remedy is, she nodded. And because, Mr. Kim, you're running out of time." Minjun's heart skipped a beat. He turned to look at his mother, lying still in the bed. Her eyes were closed now, but he couldn't shake the feeling that what the nurse said was true. Was she actually responding? Was she fighting? His mind spun, and for a moment, he considered just throwing this woman out, ignoring everything she had to offer. But the desperation in her eyes, the weight of his mother's condition, weighed heavily on him. He clenched his fists at his sides. "You want to know how we got here?" the nurse asked softly, her voice steady despite the tension hanging in the air. "If you want to know whether she survives, subscribe, like, and drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Now, let me take you back to where this impossible story really began. The build-up. 3 weeks earlier, everything had been normal. Well, as normal as it could be for a man who ran the most powerful Korean crime organization in Los Angeles. Minjun Kim had never been one for weakness. He ruled the drug trade, the gambling, the protection rackets, all of it. He controlled everything that ran through Koreatown and beyond. People feared him. Politicians took his money and turned a blind eye. Cops who got too curious found themselves transferred to quiet desks far away. But none of that mattered when he walked through the door of his mother's small apartment every Sunday evening. Mrs. Sun-hee Kim had raised Minjun alone after his father disappeared when he was 5 years old. She had worked long hours cleaning offices, sewing clothes, and even selling homemade kimchi on the weekends, all so her son could have a future. She had never once asked for help or complained about the life she was forced to live. "Why don't you move into a real house, Ma?" Minjun had begged 1,000 times. "I'll buy you a mansion. A house in Beverly Hills, a penthouse. Anything you want." But Sun-hee always refused. "This apartment holds my memories of raising you," she would say, patting his cheek like he was still a little boy. "Why would I leave?" They had an unspoken understanding. Minjun never talked about his business when he was with her. On Sunday evenings, he wasn't the feared crime boss. He was just her son, sitting at the dinner table eating bulgogi and listening to her talk about the old country, about how things used to be. But that Sunday in late October, everything felt different. Minjun arrived at 6 p.m., sharp as always, and parked his black Mercedes across from her building. His bodyguard, Deong, stayed in the car downstairs, watching the street. Minjun climbed the 3 flights of stairs to his mother's apartment, his shoes clicking on the worn-down steps. He knocked 3 times on the door, the special signal they shared. The door creaked open, and Minjun froze. His mother didn't greet him with her usual bright smile. Instead, she looked awful. Her eyes were dull, her face pale, her once strong body trembling as she gripped the doorframe for support. "Ma?" Minjun rushed forward, catching her before she collapsed. "I'm fine," she whispered weakly, trying to reassure him, but her voice lacked its usual strength. "Just a little dizzy. Probably didn't eat enough lunch."
Minjun didn't buy it.
He felt the icy grip of fear wrap around his heart. His mother, who had never once been sick, was suddenly like this? He half carried her to the couch, his mind racing. "How long has this been going on?" he demanded, pulling out his phone. "It's nothing, son," he said with a sigh, collapsing into the cushions. "Maybe 2 weeks, just been tired, dizzy, achy. But I'm 61 now. Old people get tired." Minjun dialed the hospital. He wasn't taking any chances. 20 minutes later, Sun Hee was checked into Cedar Heights Medical Center, the most expensive private hospital in Los Angeles. Minjun had called ahead, and a team of doctors was already waiting for them when they arrived. As they ran tests, Minjun paced the waiting room like a caged animal, his men standing nervously nearby.
No one spoke to him.
No one dared. When Minjun was worried, everyone knew to stay quiet. It took 3 hours before Dr. Richard Harrison, the head of internal medicine, called Minjun into his office. "Mr. Kim, please sit down." "I'll stand." Dr. Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Your mother has a very rare blood disorder," he said. "Acquired pure red cell aplasia. Essentially, her bone marrow has stopped producing red blood cells, and her blood can no longer carry oxygen throughout her body." Minjun's fists clenched at his sides. "So, treat it. Fix it." Dr. Harrison's face grew serious. "Mr. Kim, this condition is extremely rare. It's very difficult to treat. We can try immunosuppressive therapy, blood transfusions to manage the symptoms, but we don't have much time. Her survival rate is low." Minjun stepped closer to the desk, his voice rising. "Then do whatever it takes. I'll pay for whatever experimental treatments you need. Bring in specialists. I don't care what it costs. You will save my mother." Dr. Harrison's voice was soft, but the words hit hard. "This isn't about money. There are things even unlimited resources can't fix." Minjun's anger flared. "Then you'll figure out how to fix the impossible. Because if my mother dies, Dr. Harrison, I will hold you personally responsible. Do you understand what that means?" Dr. Harrison went pale. The next 2 weeks felt like a blur. Minjun threw every resource at the problem. Specialists came from all over the country, from New York, Boston, even South Korea. Each one examined Sun Hee, then shook their heads. No one had an answer. No one could help. Sun Hee grew weaker with each passing day. She could barely stay awake for a few hours. But when Minjun visited her, she smiled as if everything was still normal, still fine. "I'm sorry you're spending all this money on me," she whispered one afternoon, barely able to speak. "Money doesn't mean anything if I can't use it to help you." Minjun clenched his jaw. His empire of money, fear, and power had brought him nothing but helplessness in the face of his mother's condition. Nothing he had built could save her. On the 15th day, Dr. Harrison called Minjun aside. The prognosis was even worse now. "We've exhausted all options," he said quietly. "The blood transfusions are no longer working. Her body is shutting down." "I'm so sorry, Mr. Kim. We're looking at days now, maybe hours." Minjun felt like the world had tilted. This was his mother, the woman who had given him everything. And now she was slipping away. The room was quiet now, save for the soft beeping of the machines monitoring his mother's frail heart. Minjun stood by the window, staring out at the city of Los Angeles, which seemed to be moving in a blur, oblivious to the storm brewing inside room 304. His mind was still reeling from the doctor's words. We're looking at days now, maybe hours. His mother's time was running out, and there was nothing left to do. Minjun's empire of money, fear, and power had meant nothing here. Not in the sterile, cold hospital room where his mother lay dying. The very things he had fought for all his life, status, influence, control, couldn't fix this. He couldn't buy her more time, couldn't use his name to force a miracle. I'll pay anything, he had told Dr. Harrison, but it was clear now that money couldn't change fate. He looked back at his mother's face. Her once strong features now seemed like a mask, worn thin by years of hardship. The woman who had raised him alone after his father had disappeared when he was just 5 years old. The woman who had worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices, sewing clothes, selling homemade kimchi, to ensure that he had a future. The woman who had never once complained, no matter how hard life had been. The woman who had sacrificed everything for him. And now she was slipping away, and all he could do was watch. Minjun sat beside her bed, his fingers gently brushing the back of her hand. He had always told himself that as long as he had power, as long as he had money, there was nothing in this world he couldn't fix. But now, in this moment, those things felt like illusions. He could feel the weight of his mother's frailty pressing down on him, suffocating him. "Please, Yama," he whispered, using the nickname he had always called her. "Don't leave me." He didn't know how long he sat there, but eventually the sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Diong, his trusted bodyguard, was standing in the doorway, a look of concern on his face. "Boss," Diong said softly, "there's something you need to know." Minjun straightened up, wiping his eyes quickly. "What is it?" "We got word," Diong continued, his voice low. "Someone's been asking about Grace."
Grace.
The nurse. The woman who had appeared out of nowhere with a bowl of strange herbs, claiming she could save his mother. Minjun's mind snapped to attention. "What do you mean asking about her?" Minjun's voice was sharp, his instincts kicking into high gear. "Who's asking?" "Some of the people in the underground networks," Diong said, glancing around the room. "The pharmaceutical industry, mostly. They've been asking questions about the remedies she's been using. Word's getting around about how your mother's improving. We've also heard that there's been some interest in her grandmother's remedies." Minjun's heart skipped a beat. He knew exactly what that meant. Grace's grandmother's remedies had saved his mother's life. And now, there were people out there who were willing to do whatever it took to get their hands on them. "Do we know who's behind it?" Minjun asked, his eyes narrowing. Diong hesitated. "Not yet. But it's clear that someone's been watching closely. They know about the tea, about how it's helping your mother. And if they know, that means other people will start looking too." Minjun stood up quickly, his mind racing. He had already seen enough in his life to understand what this meant. People who wanted power, people who wanted control, they didn't hesitate to do whatever it took to get it. And if they wanted Grace's grandmother's secrets, if they wanted that old remedy, they would stop at nothing. "Get our men on it," Minjun ordered, his voice cold as ice. "I want to know who's asking about her, who's been making inquiries. Find out everything." Diong nodded and left the room, but Minjun couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away faster than he realized. His mother was improving, yes, but what if this sudden interest in Grace's remedies wasn't just coincidence? What if someone was already planning to take what they thought they deserved, regardless of the cost? Minjun moved to the window, staring out at the city once again. His mind wandered back to his mother's life, the sacrifices she had made for him, the strength she had shown in the face of every challenge. When he was a child, Sun-hee Kim had always told him stories about the old country. She would speak of Korea with a far-off look in her eyes, telling him tales of a time when life was simpler, when people took care of each other, when family was everything. Minjun had always thought it was just nostalgia, a longing for a past that didn't exist anymore. But now, standing here in this hospital room, watching his mother fade away, those stories felt like they had more weight than he had ever given them. Minjun had never believed in miracles. He had always believed in leverage, in power, in making people fear him. He had never believed that anything outside of his control could save someone. But now, after everything that had happened, after Grace's grandmother's remedy had worked when nothing else had, he was forced to wonder. Maybe, just maybe, there were things beyond money and power that could change the course of his life. The sound of a knock at the door broke his thoughts. It was Grace, her face calm but wary. She stepped into the room, holding a small clay bowl filled with dark liquid, the same bowl from the night before. "How is she?" Grace asked softly, glancing at Sunhee, who was still sleeping peacefully. Minjun didn't answer immediately. He was still processing everything, still unsure of what to do next. But when he looked at Grace, something inside him shifted. This woman, this nurse who had nothing to gain, had risked everything to save his mother. He didn't fully understand why she had done it, but he could feel the sincerity in her eyes. "She's improving," Minjun finally said, his voice almost a whisper. "But there are people asking about you. People who want what your grandmother knew." Grace's eyes widened, and for a moment, Minjun saw a flicker of fear in her expression. But she quickly masked it, standing taller. "I don't know what they want," she said. "But I won't let them take my grandmother's secrets." Minjun stepped closer to her, his eyes intense. "You're in danger, Grace. My mother is better now, but there are people who won't stop until they get what they want. And I won't let them hurt you." Grace nodded slowly, but the weight of the situation hung heavy in the air. Minjun could feel the tension between them, the gravity of what they were facing. He took a deep breath. "We need to be careful. I'll make sure you're safe, but you need to keep your head down. Stay out of sight. I'll handle this." Grace's eyes met his, and for the first time since they had met, Minjun saw a flicker of something else in her, something that felt like trust, like a shared understanding that they were both in this together. "Thank you, Minjun," she whispered. He nodded, his face unreadable. "We're not done yet." As Grace turned to leave, Minjun's mind raced. He had a plan now. He had to find out who was behind this, who was after Grace's grandmother's remedies, and he needed to act fast. He wasn't about to lose the one thing that had saved his mother. He couldn't let them take it away. Minjun sat alone in the dimly lit room, the faint hum of hospital equipment the only sound around him. His thoughts were a whirlwind, colliding with each other like a storm in his mind. Grace's words echoed in his ears, the quiet urgency in her voice ringing louder than ever. "You're in danger, Grace. My mother is better now, but there are people who won't stop until they get what they want. And I won't let them hurt you." Minjun was a man of action. He had spent his life building an empire based on control, intimidation, and power. He had bent the world to his will, forcing others to play by his rules. But this was different. This wasn't about money or about threats. This was something far beyond anything he could manipulate with his usual tactics. His mother, the woman who had raised him single-handedly, was still weak, but she was breathing. Her color had returned, her strength slowly returning with each passing hour. The strange remedy Grace had given her was working. But as the days passed, Minjun began to realize the price of this miracle was higher than he had ever anticipated. Someone had been watching. Someone had noticed that the impossible was happening. And someone wanted what they thought they could control. Minjun could feel it in his gut. Grace was in danger. And there was nothing he could do to stop it unless he figured out who was behind it, who was pulling the strings. As the evening sun dipped behind the Los Angeles skyline, Minjun leaned back in his chair, the weight of his responsibilities bearing down on him. His men were out on the streets, investigating the strange interest in Grace's grandmother's remedies. But so far, they had found nothing except for whispers and shadows. People were asking questions, but no one knew who was asking them. The door creaked open, and Diong stepped in. His face was grim, his expression tense. "Boss," he said softly, his voice betraying the seriousness of the situation. "We have a lead." Minjun's heart rate quickened. "What did you find?" Diong hesitated for a moment before continuing. "We tracked the source of the interest to a pharmaceutical company called Hendrix Biomed. They've been buying up small companies that specialize in natural remedies. Word is they've been trying to patent old medicines, like the ones Grace's grandmother knew. They're looking for a way to turn them into profit. Minjun stood up abruptly. And you think they're after Grace's grandmother's recipes? Dion nodded. Yes, and they've been digging into Cedar Heights Medical Center. They heard about your mother's recovery. It's clear they're interested in more than just the remedy. They want the whole thing, the secrets, the knowledge. They want control over it. Minjun's fists clenched at his sides. The thought of someone exploiting Grace's grandmother's life's work made his blood boil. He had already lost too much in this world. He wasn't going to let anyone take what belonged to Grace, what had saved his mother. Find out everything about this Hendrix Biomed, Minjun said coldly. Who's running it? Who's behind it? And I want to know exactly how far they're willing to go to get their hands on this remedy. Dion nodded, his eyes burning with determination. We're on it, boss. As Dion left the room, Minjun's mind raced. He had to protect Grace. And to do that, he needed to be one step ahead of those who would use her and her grandmother's knowledge for their own gain. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings with informants, and preparations. Minjun had his men dig deep into the pharmaceutical company's history, its connections, its backers. What they found didn't surprise him. Hendrix Biomed had been quietly acquiring smaller companies in the alternative medicine space for years, building a portfolio of patents that ranged from herbal teas to natural painkillers. But what struck Minjun as the most dangerous was the company's ambition. They didn't just want to make money, they wanted to control everything. They wanted to monopolize ancient healing traditions. Grace's grandmother's remedies could be worth millions, perhaps more. But the knowledge she held wasn't something to be bought and sold. It was sacred, passed down from generation to generation, meant to heal, not to profit. Minjun's phone buzzed. It was a message from Dion. We found something on Marcus Webb. Ex-military, dishonorable discharge. Connected to Hendrix Biomed. He's the head of acquisitions. Minjun's mind clicked into place. Marcus Webb. He had a scar on his right hand from a knife fight in Afghanistan. Minjun had seen that scar before, when they had interrogated a low-level employee at one of Hendrix's subsidiaries. Minjun's pulse quickened. It wasn't a coincidence. This man, Marcus Webb, was the key to everything. Minjun wasted no time. He called Dion. Get everyone together. We're going after Marcus Webb. The plan was simple. Marcus Webb had a beach house in Santa Monica, a location that reeked of money and secrets. Minjun wasn't going to wait for more information. He was going to take matters into his own hands. He had to get to Webb before Hendrix Biomed moved on Grace or anyone else. Time was running out. That night, under the cover of darkness, Minjun and his men arrived at Marcus Webb's beach house. It was a sprawling, modern mansion perched above the waves, the sound of the ocean barely audible over the roar of their engines. The house was silent, too silent. Minjun's instincts told him it was a trap, but he didn't care. He wasn't about to back down. He motioned for his men to stay close as they approached the front door. With one swift motion, Minjun kicked the door down, his men flooding into the house. It was dark inside, but the faint glow of moonlight filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the furniture. Minjun didn't wait. He moved quickly, pushing through the hallways, searching for any sign of Marcus Webb. They found him in the master bedroom, asleep, but he was far from defenseless. The second he saw Minjun and his men, his hand shot toward the nightstand, grabbing for a gun. But Minjun was faster. He kicked the weapon away, sending it skittering across the floor. Looking for this? Minjun asked, holding the gun in his hand, before tossing it aside with disdain. Marcus Webb tried to act tough, but Minjun could see the fear in his eyes. You don't know who I work for, Webb spat. You have no idea what Hendrix Biomed will do to you. Minjun grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off the bed with one hand. Do you know whose mother you kidnapped? Webb's eyes widened in fear. We didn't know she was anyone important. We just needed leverage. Minjun slammed Webb against the wall, the force of it rattling the windows. Where is she? I can't tell you. My boss's orders. Minjun didn't wait for him to finish. With one swift motion, He broke Webb's pinky finger, hearing it snap like a twig.
Where is
She? Webb screamed in pain. A warehouse. 5th and Central. Vernon. It's where they take people for interrogation. Minjun dropped him to the ground, watching as Webb cradled his broken hand. How many guards? 4, Webb whimpered. Just 4. Please, no more. Minjun turned to his men. We're going to Vernon. As they drove through the dark streets of LA, Minjun's mind was already calculating their next move. The warehouse was their next target. He couldn't afford to waste time. Grace's life was on the line, and he would do whatever it took to save her. When they arrived at the warehouse in Vernon, the building was eerily quiet. The streetlights barely illuminated the dusty exterior. Minjun's men moved quickly and silently, taking out the guards before they even had a chance to react. No shots were fired. It was quick, clean. But Minjun's heart pounded in his chest as they pushed open the door to the small office in the back of the warehouse. And there, tied to a chair, was his mother. Minjun rushed to her side, his heart in his throat. Yama, he whispered, his voice breaking. She looked up at him, her face pale but alive. And then, to his shock, she smiled. Minjun, you worry too much, she said, her voice weak but full of warmth. I'm fine. Minjun froze for a moment, his emotions choking him. You're fine?
They kidnapped you.
Yes, but it was very annoying. The food was terrible, and they wouldn't let me use the bathroom. Minjun couldn't help but laugh, even as his mind raced. The danger wasn't over yet, but for now his mother was alive, and that was all that mattered. The night felt endless as Minjun's mind spun with the events that had unfolded. The sound of his mother's laughter, though weak, was a small comfort in the chaos of what had just transpired. He had saved her again, but at what cost? As his men secured the warehouse, making sure no one else would try to retaliate, Minjun turned to his mother, who was now safely tucked in the back of his car, her hands weakly resting in his lap. Yama, I'm so sorry, he whispered, his voice raw with guilt. I should have been there. Son, he smiled faintly, looking up at him with tired eyes. You're here now. That's what matters. You came for me. You always do. Minjun's heart clenched as he watched his mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, still trying to comfort him despite the hell she had just gone through. It was almost too much to bear. She had always been his rock, but tonight, she was the one who needed him more than ever. Let's get you home, Minjun said, his voice steely with determination. He wasn't about to let anyone hurt his mother again, not as long as he still had breath in his body. Back at Minjun's penthouse, the tension in the air was palpable. Grace, who had been staying at the penthouse for her own protection, was pacing anxiously in the living room. Minjun's men had kept watch over her since the kidnapping, but now that his mother was safe, Grace felt as if the danger was far from over. When Minjun entered, Grace looked up at him, her face full of worry. How is she? She asked quietly. Minjun nodded, his voice tight. She's alive, but we're not out of the woods yet. Grace let out a breath of relief, but her shoulders were still heavy with the weight of the situation. I don't know how much more I can take, Minjun. They're going to come after me again. I know it. Minjun's eyes narrowed. We won't let them. He sat down across from Grace, his mind already racing. The pharmaceutical company, Hendrix Biomed, wasn't going to stop.
He knew that now.
Their hunger for the grandmother's remedies, those simple, natural cures, had become an obsession, something that went far beyond mere greed. They had nearly killed his mother to get to Grace, and they wouldn't hesitate to try again. Do you know anything else about them? Minjun asked, his voice steady. Any weaknesses? Grace shook her head. Not really. I don't know much about the company, but I do know one thing. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want, and they're dangerous. I don't think they care who gets hurt in the process. Minjun thought about the man they had interrogated, Marcus Webb. He had confessed about the warehouse, about the kidnapping, but Minjun knew that wasn't enough. He needed to know more. He needed to know who was really pulling the strings. I'm going after them, Minjun said firmly. I'll use everything I have, everything I've built. I'll make sure they regret crossing us. Grace looked at him, her eyes full of hesitation. Minjun, please. There's another way. He tilted his head, his brow furrowing in confusion. What are you talking about? Grace stood up, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them in front of her. Maybe we don't need to fight fire with fire. Maybe we can do something else, something better. My grandmother, she always believed that healing wasn't just about medicine. It was about community, about people coming together to help each other. Minjun stared at her, his mind working quickly. He had built his entire life on fear and power, and here she was suggesting that they use something entirely different. Kindness, healing, trust. He didn't know how to respond to that. It seemed so foreign. But Grace wasn't done. We could start a clinic, she continued. A place where people can come and get help with the remedies, where the knowledge is shared openly. We can make it legal, Minjun. People can learn how to help themselves just like my grandmother did. Minjun leaned back in his chair, the weight of her words sinking in. A clinic. A place where the secrets of Grace's grandmother's remedies wouldn't be hidden, wouldn't be stolen by greedy companies. It was an idea. A crazy one, but maybe it was the right one. He was silent for a moment, deep in thought, before speaking. You really think it'll work? Grace nodded, her expression earnest. I do. My grandmother always said that healing is about more than just plants and roots. It's about sharing knowledge, about helping each other. If we keep the remedies hidden, people will always try to take them. But if we share them, maybe we can make a real difference. Minjun's eyes met hers, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real hope. Not the kind that came from fear or control, but the kind that came from helping others, from doing something good for once. I'll fund it, Minjun said, his voice firm. I'll make it happen. Grace, you'll run it. You'll make sure it's done right. Grace's eyes widened in surprise, but she quickly masked her emotions. You're really willing to do this? Minjun nodded. We'll call it the Ruth Waters Healing Center. After your grandmother. Grace's heart skipped a beat. She had always dreamed of carrying on her grandmother's legacy, but she never thought it would happen like this. Not with someone like Minjun, a man whose empire had been built on fear. But somehow, he was giving her the chance to do something good. The phone buzzed on the table between them. Minjun picked it up, his eyes narrowing as he saw the name on the screen. It's Diong, he muttered, answering the call. Boss, we've got a problem, Diong said immediately. The hospital administrator, Dr. Patricia Morris, is pushing back. She's making a case that the clinic will be illegal if it starts offering treatments that aren't FDA approved. They're afraid of the publicity. Minjun's eyes burned with frustration. Of course, the hospital was going to resist. They didn't want their secrets getting out. But Minjun wasn't about to back down now. Let them try, he said coldly. I'll deal with them. No one's stopping this clinic. No one's stopping Grace. Not now, not ever. He hung up the phone and turned back to Grace. We're going to make this work. No matter what. Grace smiled at him, a small but genuine smile. For the first time since she had come to LA, she felt like she had found something worth fighting for. And she wasn't about to let anything or anyone stand in her way. Days passed, and the groundwork for the Ruth Waters Healing Center began to take shape. Minjun threw all his resources into making sure the clinic was ready. He knew it would take time, but he was determined to see it through. The idea of helping people, of using his wealth and influence for something good, was a challenge he had never imagined. But he found himself embracing it. As for Grace, she spent her days organizing everything, gathering the herbs, the books, and the knowledge passed down from her grandmother. She began writing everything down, carefully documenting each remedy, each herb, and its purpose. Minjun made sure they had everything they needed to operate legally, and despite the resistance from the hospital, he knew they were on the right path. But even as they worked to open the clinic, the shadows of the past were never far behind. Hendrix Biomed was still out there, and they weren't going to give up easily. Minjun knew the storm wasn't over. One evening, as Minjun sat in his penthouse office overlooking the city, A familiar chill ran down his spine. He could feel it. The storm was about to break. And when it did, he would be ready. The fight for Grace's grandmother's legacy was just beginning. The Ruth Waters Healing Center stood tall in the heart of Koreatown, a symbol of hope, a place where the ancient remedies of Grace's grandmother could now be shared with the world. What had started as a quiet dream, whispered in the corners of Minjun's penthouse, had grown into something powerful, something real. Minjun stood at the entrance of the clinic, watching as patients walked in and out, some holding their heads high with renewed hope, others looking unsure but eager to try something new. There was a sense of peace here, a calm that Minjun had never known in his life. For the first time, he felt like he was doing something that mattered, not for the money, not for the power, but for the people who walked through those doors, looking for healing in more ways than one. Inside, Grace was teaching a small group of nurses how to identify different herbs, how to prepare the remedies, and how to heal with more than just medicine. She moved with purpose, her grandmother's wisdom shining through in every word she spoke. Minjun watched her for a moment from the doorway, a strange feeling settling in his chest. For so long, he had been driven by power, by the desire to control everything around him. But now, as he saw the clinic thriving, he realized that true power wasn't about fear. It wasn't about making people bow down to you or shaking them with intimidation. True power was in the ability to help others, to heal them, and to make the world a little better for someone else. The door opened behind him, and Sunhee, his mother, stepped into the room, her face radiant as ever. She had spent the last few weeks volunteering at the clinic, helping Grace and the nurses with everything from making tea to greeting patients. Minjun couldn't remember the last time he had seen her this happy. She smiled at him. "You've done something good here, Minjun. I'm proud of you." He met her gaze and felt a lump in his throat. "I couldn't have done it without you, Yama. You've always been the one to show me what really matters." She reached out and squeezed his arm. "And you've finally found it, my son. Love. Compassion. You've always had it in you." Minjun didn't know what to say to that. He had always been afraid to show weakness, to show the love he had buried deep inside. But now, as he stood in this small clinic with the woman who had always been his heart, and with Grace who had changed the course of his life, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he had been looking for the wrong things all along. But the battle wasn't over. Even as the clinic continued to grow, the shadow of Hendrik's biomeds still loomed. They had tried to disrupt the clinic at every turn, throwing obstacles in their path, trying to turn public opinion against them. But Minjun wasn't the same man he used to be. He didn't fight with threats or fear anymore. He fought with something stronger. "Minjun," Grace said softly as she approached him, her voice calm but urgent. "They're still watching us. Hendrix, they won't stop." He nodded, his eyes narrowing. "I know. But we're not backing down. This clinic will stand, and we will fight for what's right. We've already won the hardest battle, keeping this knowledge safe and helping people. They can't take that from us." She smiled, a mix of relief and gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you for believing in me, in my grandmother's legacy." Minjun placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's not just about the legacy, Grace. It's about everything you've done, and everything we'll continue to do." And for the first time in his life, Minjun felt free. He wasn't bound by the chains of his past. He wasn't driven by the need to control or dominate. He was driven by something greater now, the desire to protect, to heal, and to do good. The next few months passed in a blur of growth for the clinic. People came from all over Los Angeles, some with ailments modern medicine couldn't cure, some just looking for something different, something real. And as the clinic flourished, Minjun began to step back from his criminal empire, delegating more and more of the day-to-day operations to his trusted men. The money he once used to fuel fear was now being redirected into something that mattered, a legacy of healing and hope. One evening, Minjun sat in the back office of the clinic, going through papers for the upcoming expansion. Grace came in, her eyes bright and full of excitement. "Minjun," she said, her voice bubbling with joy. "We've been approved for a partnership with a major health organization. They want to help us expand the clinic even further. This could be huge. Minjun stood up, his heart swelling with pride. I always knew you were capable of great things, Grace. You're going to change the world. She smiled at him, a mixture of gratitude and humility. We're changing it together. He nodded, his mind already working on the next steps. The clinic was just the beginning. Together, they would build something that would outlast them both. And no one, no matter how powerful, would ever be able to take it from them. It was Christmas Eve when everything finally came full circle. Minjun stood outside the clinic, watching the lights twinkle in the window as families gathered inside, sharing food and laughter. His mother was inside, laughing with the patients, helping Grace prepare more herbal tea. The joy in her eyes was a sight Minjun had never thought he'd see again. The weight of everything he had fought for, the empire, the power, the fear, seemed so distant now. It wasn't the world he wanted anymore. What mattered now was the people around him, the family he had nearly lost, and the future they were building together. A future filled with love, with healing, with hope. Minjun's phone buzzed. It was a message from Diong. The hospital dropped all charges. Hendrik's biomed has backed off. Minjun smiled, staring out at the clinic's glowing lights. It was a victory, but not the one he had imagined when he first started out. This victory was for Grace, for his mother, and for everyone who walked through the doors looking for something more than just medicine. He put his phone in his pocket and stepped back into the clinic, where Grace was waiting for him. "Happy Christmas, Minjun," she said, her voice warm and filled with affection. "Happy Christmas," he replied, his heart light. He had everything he needed now. Love, family, and the chance to build something real. And as the clock struck midnight, Minjun knew one thing for sure. No matter what came next, he would always fight for what mattered. The end. Love you all, and Merry Christmas. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to support our growth, and stay tuned for more amazing stories. And remember, it's never too late to change and do good in the world. Until next time, take care of each other.